Hello, sorry about that, everyone. I'm Jemima Olchawski. I'm the Chief Executive of the Fawcett Society. Thank you for joining us today as we celebrate International Women's Day with 4 leading charities taking part in a chain of events right across the UK. We're being joined today by Northern Ireland's European Women's Platform, Women's Equality Network Wales, and Scotland's Engender to explore the work we're all doing to break the bias. In just a few minutes, I'll be handing over to the host of Northern Ireland's European Women's Platforms event, Louise Kennedy, who'll be exploring what a Northern Ireland that works for women looks like. At 4, we at Fawcett are joined by some really incredible women discussing the barriers to women playing sport. And that will be followed by Katherine of Women's Equality Network Wales, chairing a conversation on diverse and equal representation at 5. And lastly, at 6 p.m, Alice from Engender will host a conversation about activism, resistance, and how Black feminism and Afrofeminism imagine a Black feminist Europe. So now we're going to move to the Fawcett leg of our tour of the 4 nations, where we're going to be talking about tackling the barriers to women playing sport. In 2020, Fawcett published Unlimited Potential, which was our groundbreaking research showing how gender stereotypes limit our children and really stop them from just being themselves. And one thing that came through really clearly was that many girls don't participate in sport because of gender stereotypes. So we see girls being given dolls and boys being given footballs and cricket bats. Girls are less likely to be encouraged to get active and to take physical risks. And then as they get older, that feeds into continuing decline in participation. Sport England has found that 2 million fewer women take part in sport compared to men. And the Race Equality Foundation finds that gap is even larger for women of colour. And our research here at Fawcett has also found that women are less likely to hold positions of power and influence in sport. So our report, Sex and Power 2022, found that just 15% of leadership positions in sports governing bodies are held by women, and only 5% of Premier League CEOs are women. So all this adds up to fewer women participating, with impacts for their physical and mental health, as well as opportunities to connect, to get involved and meet new people, and to benefit from the joy of sport. So Fawcett is launching our Equal Play campaign to smash those gender stereotypes and support children to play without limits. And we're really excited that we've been awarded funding by the Big Give. So for every £1 that we raise, for every £1 that you give, Fawcett will receive £2. So there's some information in the chat. Please do give if you can. Every £1 makes a real difference to us. But without further ado, I'm joined today by 4 incredible women with insights into what some of those barriers are to women enjoying sport. Dr. Stacey Pope is Associate Professor of Sport and Exercise Science at the University of Durham. Linda Agyemang is co-founder of Black Girls Do Run UK. Saf Greenwood is fresh back from her 2-woman mission to row across the Atlantic. She and her teammate Victoria Carroll have raised nearly £10,000 for the Fawcett Society. So thank you both so much for that. And Hope Powell is head coach of Brighton and Hove Albion women's football team. So we're going to have some conversation with the panelists, and then I'll open up for Q&A. Please do put Q&As into the Q&A function, and we can come to them at the end. Stacey, can I start with you? Because I think your research really highlights some of what women are up against when they get into the world of sport. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so thanks for having me here. I think in terms of barriers, one of the areas that I've been looking at in my recent research has been the extent of misogyny towards women's participation in sport. So in terms of the research findings, what we looked at was male football fans and their attitudes towards women engaging with sport, and the most dominant group were found to be men performing misogynistic attitudes, or men expressing misogynistic attitudes, and that made up 2/3 of the group. And these were men that, I guess, every time we make progress, every time we see more women engaging in sports, we also get a backlash. So they would actually argue that we shouldn't have, even as far as we shouldn't have women's sport televised, It was seen as something that was responding to the PC brigade. And they'd go as far as to suggest that women, if they do participate in sport, they shouldn't take part in certain sports, such as traditionally male contact team sports like football. So it was a survey that was done with nearly 2,000 men. And I think that it really helped to highlight the extent of sexism and misogyny at a time in, well, UK society where we're seeing this more broadly in terms of a whole range of different areas. I mean, this looked at sport, but we're just seeing it everywhere, really. And I think it was kind of, yeah, looking at those kinds of attitudes in terms of barriers for women's participation.
Thank you, Stacey. That's really well, interesting. I was going to say great to hear, but obviously the findings are pretty harrowing and concerning. Perhaps if I could come to some of our other panelists now, you could sort of just tell us a little bit about how you've experienced some of that stereotyping in sport, but also how you've got involved and encouraged other women to participate. Linda, can I start with you?
Hi, my name is Linda Agyemang, and I'm the co-founder of Black Girls Do Run UK. It's a running group that's set up to encourage and motivate Black women to run. We began our journey about 3 years ago when the founder of the group, Tasha Thompson, when we were out at a race and we noticed that there was a lack of diversity of Black women running. And we thought that there's something that could be done about this. So yeah, she started the group about 3 years ago. We're coming up to our 3rd year anniversary, and we've grown immensely since then. As a group, we've taken part in so many events, such as the London Marathon, the Vitality Big Half, London Landmarks. And each time we're noticing that slowly we're increasing diversity and increasing the participation of Black women running. If you look at statistics, you'll see that when Black women and women from ethnic minorities are less likely to take part in physical activities. So our aim is to break the bias in that department and encourage them to run more, because we believe that sometimes you can't be what you can't see. And if we're out there being represented, people are more often to take up the sport and activity especially for health reasons. And yeah, it really does help our women. We've grown, we've got maybe over 60 members in our group. We've got members of our group that live in London and outside of London, and we meet up once a month for monthly runs, yeah, to encourage each other. We have a WhatsApp group. Every day we message each other in there, and we encourage each other to run, and it's going great.
That's amazing to hear. And the women who are getting involved, are they women who've kind of never been active before, maybe have dabbled a little bit, but kind of held back from joining running clubs and that kind of stuff? Is it a real mix?
Yes, there's a real mix, but a lot of the women have, most of them have never run before, because they have attempted to run, but have been scared of going out there and not seeing people like them running and being judged. One of the big aspects is sometimes we're very body conscious as well, and we fear what people might say when we're running, because we have experienced people catcalling or, you know, saying things to us while we're running. We get very fearful of that. So when we run in a group, it feels more doable, and you feel like you can do this. So there's nothing more pleasurable than seeing someone who wouldn't really usually get out there and run, actually running for the first time, and feeling the courage to enter races and you know, achieve their goals of, you know, getting fit or running 5K to 10K, you know, then to half a marathon, and lots of people in the group half marathons as well. So yeah, the group has really helped. So we've got a range of people, because people assume that when you run, you have to be fast, but our group is not about that. It's about encouraging women to do, on all different abilities and all levels, to do what they can. It's not a race. you know, we encourage people on all levels, and that's the good thing about our group, because we've got a mixture of ability. And these are women that would have never thought about running before until they joined our group, because they feel like it's a safe space for them and they're able to be themselves, and that's very important for us.
So it really feels like you're kind of creating a community and a space of acceptance that allows women to go for it, to enjoy sport, and to step away from that judgment or the expectation that other people might have been placing on them.
Yes, for sure. We've had women that, like, for myself, I found it hard to go out and run before because I was scared of judgment, people looking at me. I'm quite big boobed woman, and I used to get people yelling at me, or, you know, looking at my bum or saying little things. And with the help of Black Girls Do running in groups, I can actually go out and run on my own now and not feel nervous and have that confidence. And I think that's what is given people. And some people in our group who don't like running on our own, we've got different areas, groups in different areas, and sometimes they meet up and they run together as well, which is very, very encouraging. And in our group, if you having a bad day, you don't feel like running, once you've seen that somebody else has been out for a run, that also encourages you to do so as well. So yeah, it's been really good. Sometimes we have had incidents where we have had people throwing bottles at us, and that was something that was quite scary, but we were lucky that we were with a group, and something like that we fed back to the rest of our group. It wasn't something we were going to report, and somebody said, you know what, you should actually report that so that you can protect other women who are out there, you know, running as well. So we do believe in safety is numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Saf, can I come to you now? You've also seriously smashed some stereotypes and overcome some expectations and perceptions about what you might be able to do in your time. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk, and it's wonderful to be back on land after 2 months at sea. There's a very interesting approach quite a lot of the time that I found when you tell people going to do an endurance event that, you know, do I really understand what I'm taking on? I received so many offers of support, unfortunately, from people who weren't rowers and certainly had never rowed an ocean, and maybe didn't even know anyone who did row an ocean. And that was all from men who I think genuinely thought they were trying to help me. But, you know, at one point I got some advice about 6 weeks before I went out to the start line from someone who was thinking about doing it in a few years' time. So I've been working on this project for 3 years, and there was just this complete oblivion to the fact that I might know what I'm talking about. And endurance events so often have an even lower percentage of participation from women compared to shorter events. I think more than twice as many men have been into space as women have rowed an ocean. That's just, you know, people in space is a tiny number already. And yes, it's 2 months out of our lives, and it tends to be in 20s and 30s when we're meant to be doing other things. We're either meant to be focusing on our family or thinking about our career. And I had the audacity at work to say, actually, I want to focus on me. You know, I started rowing again because I'd had a severe mental health crisis, and it was my way of regaining my identity, my self-confidence, my life. And I chose to put everything on hold for a couple of months to do the row. But yeah, and it was fantastic. Finishing was amazing. The 2 months beforehand, less great, but finishing was fantastic.
And what do you think it was that drew you to such an intense endurance activity? Do you think part of it was wanting to kind of challenge those expectations about what your role might be or how you should be maybe spending your time?
I would like to think it was, but I suspect it was more that I wanted to challenge myself and challenge the perception I had of me at the time. Yeah, I decided to do this 3 years ago, so I've had a huge amount of growth since then. But I think at the time of deciding, I felt that if I could do this, then surely I could deal with everything else at work. Surely I could deal with everything else that the world throws at me, because worse things happen at sea is an expression for a reason. And it's true, and I found a great sense of identity as a result of it. And I'm looking forward to, my after photo is going to become my work profile photo. And I can't wait to see Ministry of Defence personnel get really confused that this confident ocean rower is now briefing you, because that's who I am now.
Brilliant. I love that idea about the empowering kind of nature of sport and testing and strengthening your body, and how that does give you this sense of, yeah, I can overcome this other like day-to-day nonsense that I'm having to put up with maybe. Hope, can you tell us about your experience at Brighton and Hove Albion? And, you know, in particular, I wonder about Stacey's research relates to football, and whether you come up against any of that, or how you might have challenged some of that.
Sorry, I didn't hear the research.
Sorry.
But thank you for having me. I can tell you a little bit about my kind of journey into sport, and certainly into football. I was a young girl who could play any sport, but my real passion was football. So I decided to go down this path of firstly just playing for fun, and then I managed to get myself into an organised team many years ago. You know, the opportunities to play football in an organised environment for females was really rare. But I decided at quite a young age I wanted to be employed in the business of football. What that looked like, I didn't really know. So I decided to, you know, get myself qualified as a coach, and ended up coaching, and then having managed to, you know, land an opportunity that gave me a full-time role in the business. And that was managing in my country at first, which was very, very challenging. Getting to that point was very, very challenging, but my passion for the sport and my desire, and I guess my fight, sort of created opportunities. And thereafter I've been, you know, involved in the game from a professional standpoint for many, many years. So I went from an amateur player to a fully embedded professional coach, and then my journey's just been in coaching ever since. And today I land at Brighton. I don't know what the research was about because I had technical issues, so I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
No, that's really, really helpful. Well, I'll come back to Stacey, but the research was about evidence in football of misogynistic attitudes amongst male football fans, and sort of resistance to women participating in some sports like football at all.
Yes, I mean, I've had that over my career when I was a young girl playing, just by men in general, really. You know, girls shouldn't be playing. Do you swap shirts at halftime? Why are you playing? Why are you not in the kitchen? I've had all of that, you know, in pursuing my career. And I guess, how did I overcome that? I think my love and passion for the game was my driver. And that really allowed me to see past any of those views and you know, blanked it out, and just ended up wanting to prove to myself and to prove to those people that females in the industry are more than capable of achieving.
Do you think there's been kind of progress while you've been involved, or have things kind of stayed the same or even deteriorated?
No, I would say there's been huge progress. I think you can see the visibility of not just football, but women's sport in general. But if I look at football in particular, the women's game has just grown beyond belief. The investment is more than it's ever been in this country. Women are now, I think, you know, I've been involved in the game for many, many years. And to be able to sit here and say that young girls can be professional footballers and earn a living, and by the way, a very, very good living, you know, 30 years ago, I would have said no way. but I sit here today and say that's very, very possible. So it's definitely shifted. The mindset of people around women's football has shifted in a positive way. The accessibility of young girls playing is better than it's ever been. I think that the challenge is now sustaining it for the next 100 years. But yeah, it's definitely in a different place.
What do you think have been the things that have pushed that change forward? What is it that's made a difference?
I think people who have pushed the game to where it is now isn't just in recent years. You're talking many years ago. Those women, Dick Kerr ladies. I think if you know football, you know about Dick Kerr ladies. After that, the Women's Football Association came, and basically I was part of that as a player. We had very little resources financially. It was quite a poor governing body of the women's game. But I think those people who were responsible or who were in charge were real drivers. They were banging on doors. They were seeking sponsorship. They were asking questions around, opportunities to play. They were sorting out kit. They were sorting out the transport. And then other women came along and pushed it. And then in 1993, the FA saw the value in it and decided to govern it. And then the women that were in the industry at the time, again, were the drivers. The players have been the drivers. So I think everybody within the industry that had a passion for it, largely women, made sure their voices were heard, and just kept challenging the status quo. And I think that's part of the reason why we're here today, why women's football is in such a good place as it is today.
Amazing, thank you. Stacey, can I come back to you? It would be great to hear a bit more about what you found. And in particular, I wonder, if you're able to sort of say anything about what's causing this resistance amongst these male football fans, and how that might be kind of playing out in the reaction that women are getting when they are participating.
Yeah, I think completely agree with everything that Hope was just saying there. It's definitely important to acknowledge the whole history around the sport. That said, I think something really dramatic has changed in recent years. One of the things that I've argued in my research is that we're now in a new age of women's sport and women's football. And I pinpointed the 2015 FIFA Women's World Cup as the first iconic major women's sporting event where the media not only reported on it, and it was reported on extensively, but also reported on it as effectively a sporting event in its own right. There's a lot of research that shows how when women are reported in sport, they've been typically trivialized, they're not taken seriously, they may be reported on as mothers or partners, these kinds of things. But in this case, there were comparisons made with previous successful, we'll say, men's teams at the time. That was the 1966 men's team and the 1990 team. And so that was kind of a major turning point. And obviously we've also seen the 2012 London Olympics, the so-called women's games. We've had the move to professionalisation in women's football. We've seen the success of campaigns like This Girl Can. So there's been all this increased visibility. And I think that's why I was keen to look at, okay, so how are men responding to this? And men football fans who are fans of the men's game, it's now you kind of can't ignore it. It's there. So what is their reaction to it? And unfortunately, despite all of that progress, the research showed that actually it's kind of like one step forward in a way, and then we go back again, because there was a major backlash to the progress that's been made in the women's game. So effectively, with the 2,000, just under 2,000 responses, what I found was around a quarter of the men in the study were in the group that I've called they showed progressive attitudes, and these were men who they showed equality. They had the viewpoint that there should be equality in media coverage of women's sport. They had very positive general attitudes towards women's sport and women's football. And they speak about how iconic England events at this point, I mean, obviously then it can have the knock-on effect for clubs as well. But at this point in time, they're talking largely about the national game. And they talk about how that raises the profile of the sport. It brings women's football into the limelight. And this is all said in a really positive way. You know, they make the case that if you have increased exposure of women's sport or women's football, you can get a perceived genuine change in attitudes and a rise in the popularity of women's football as well. So they all go hand in hand. And then they would suggest that actually the media has a real responsibility here to increase the visibility of women's football, because we can change attitudes. In some cases, some of these men would move from being openly sexist to, hang on, I saw a women's football match and wow, it wasn't anything like whatever they'd got in their head was going to be like, and it changed them. They openly talk about how they would move from very sexist to then becoming a fan of the women. You know, they were a fan of men's football and they become a fan of the women's game. So that was really, really encouraging. You know, it wasn't all doom and gloom, but on the other hand, the most substantial group in the data set, you know, 3/4 of the overall numbers were located in the misogynistic group. And the misogynistic attitudes, the most prominent group, 68% of the sample, were those who had openly misogynistic attitudes. And the really depressing thing for me was this was the case regardless of age. So we had a high number of younger men as well. It wasn't like something that you could see fading out, you know, not that that would have been great either, but it would have been more encouraging in terms of, right, okay, we've seen these changes, younger men are changing their attitudes. That was the most dominant group in the sample, regardless of the different generation and the different generations. And they would really express hostile attitudes towards women's football and a real backlash against increased media coverage of the sport. And where, you know, companies like the BBC especially were brought in were really criticised as being seen to be ticking a PC box for televising the sport. And there were claims that this was just ramming women's sport down people's throats, but it's not something that's taken seriously. It's not what the average football fan wants to see. So that was really depressing. And then the final group were what I called covertly misogynistic attitudes. So these men formed a smaller group. They were only 8% of the overall sample, but they were nonetheless really important, I felt, because instead of openly belittling women's sport, they would skillfully maneuver between showing progressive attitudes and showing overtly misogynistic attitudes. So kind of in some public spaces, they would express progressive masculinities, but then in other private moments would reveal their misogynistic attitudes. And I think this is probably, you know, changes that we've seen in society. They recognize that this isn't acceptable. So if I'm in my workplace with my female boss or whatever, I'm not going to say what I think about women's sport, but then if they're in other male dominated, almost safe spaces, such as the pub, such as the football stadium, then they would talk about how they would say what they really thought, which was, again, going back to these really negative assumptions that about women's football. So they appeared to be on message and they appeared to be behind gender equality agendas, but they still saw the sport as inferior to that of men's sport. And I thought that was really interesting in terms of, well, actually challenging that presents some real, for us to actually do anything about that presents some real challenges, because they've kind of like, in this case, realised it's not appropriate to say what they really think. And so are putting on a bit of a front, and that in some ways might be more dangerous than the openly misogynistic comments, I felt.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to challenge, when someone's sort of nodding along, say, yeah, you know, I think you're equal, but then just blocking. And it's harder to sort of get to grips with what's happening and to challenge it. It's, you know, people are kind of, I suppose, taking on kind of progressive language, but just sort of not actually walking the walk. You could definitely see where that is a more kind of dangerous type of opposition to women's engagement.
Yeah, definitely. And so it was there were some reasons for optimism, and one of the big things that I've argued is there's evidence-based there that we have to be doing more to televise and make the women's game more visible. I mean, I know we've seen, even since this survey was carried out this season, obviously we've had Sky Sports step in, and we are seeing the growth there. but still there's a lot more work to do in terms of, if you pick up the newspapers, yes, it's growing, but you put Sky Sports News on, and yes, you can sometimes see women's football, but it's still very, very, very dominated by the men's game. And I don't know, Hope would probably know more about this as well, but part of my research has looked at fans of women's football and fans of men's football. And one of the things that fans of women's football have said that is really frustrating is even perhaps it's because the game has taken off so rapidly, and it's struggling to keep up in some ways, but even gaining access to kind of like basic information about kickoff times, and if they decided to televise a game and that affected the kickoff time, getting that information down to supporters doesn't seem to be happening in the way that it is for the men's game. So if you shifted a kickoff time for a big men's match, then it would it would be there and you wouldn't miss it. Whereas there was a sense that for some supporters, they were really having to look for this information and going through old social media feeds. So I think there's still a lot there in terms of the work to be done in terms of the media coverage around the game as well. But this is certainly a case to say, look, we need more of this, and it can change attitudes. It can change people from openly misogynistic to having a lot more gender progressive responses, which is what we want.
And it seems as well that kind of visibility is really important for encouraging women who aren't participating at the elite level to get involved and to give sport a try. And there was research out this week that showed how teenage girls are stopping participating because of feeling self-conscious, because of fears of being judged. And I sort of wondered what other panelists thought about how we can remove some of those pressures and do more to keep girls and young women active, so we will kind of retain that habit and don't start to identify ourselves as someone that used to be sporty when we were younger but has stopped. Linda, have you got any thoughts on that? Because it sounds like you've engaged a group of women who might not have thought about themselves as sporty.
Yeah, I think that sometimes it starts from when you're younger. For example, I know that my daughter's very interested in football. She actually plays football. We encourage both my son and daughter to take part in activities. But what I have realised is not enough time and attention is put into the women's side of football or track and field. Like, for example, if the boys have a game, the girls' football lesson will be cancelled. And that could be ongoing for like maybe 3 weeks in a row. So what happens then is the girls get kind of sidelined and then they start to lose interest. And I noticed that was the same in primary school as well as secondary school. And what happens is they just back off. The same as the netball team. They had a girls' netball team and it was going really, really well. And then the teacher couldn't teach them anymore. And they just decided not to find another teacher. And now she hasn't played netball for the last year or so, but things like the boys' football team is still going on. So what happens if you don't invest enough time, funding and attention into the girls' sport when they are younger? What happens is they actually just stop with all types of physical activity altogether. So I think that is something that needs to be looked at. And that's one of the reasons why we also our group are there to encourage women to take up that sport that they did when they were younger, for health purposes and to encourage them to move more, which is very important, which seems to have got lost along the way. And I think that's something that we need to encourage a lot more with women, starting from the roots and carrying that right through, putting more time, effort and money into women's sport and activity, and increasing the exposure as well. For example, I think last year my group appeared on the front cover of Women's Running magazine, and we got a lot of positive feedback because it was really good to see four black women on the front cover of a magazine running, which people were like, wow, now I can see myself doing that, because in our group we have people of all shapes, sizes, and people obviously assume, or what they see is women that look like a certain type running, but they saw us on there and thought, wow, that's something, that they would love to be involved in, and that's something that they can do. So I think seeing more positive images like that out there will definitely help, you know, increase awareness and encourage more women to run and take part in the sport.
Sav, have you got any thoughts about how we can help girls to stay active and stop that kind of fear of judgment, preventing them from accessing and enjoying sport of all kinds?
I wish there was a magic solution. I think that we have to really build it in from a very early age, that success in life and success in sport and sort of, you know, being able to, you know, score the goal, be it netball or football or hockey or whatever, you don't have to be the best to just keep doing it. And I'm what's lovingly known as a plodder. I don't run. I'm really bad at it, but I can tab. You can throw a lot of weight on my back and I can just keep going. And that's why an endurance sport is better for me. And giving girls the opportunity to experience a breadth of sport and find what feels good, and then start to build in not just the physical health benefits. And, you know, when it comes to core strength in your 20s and 30s, the more core stuff you've done in your teens and early years, the better your body will be. But also the mental support, the mental health support it can give. And you see people, as things get more stressful in life, they either turn to going for a run or equivalent to relax, going for a swim, or they can turn to inside activities and food, and, you know, getting those, I heard a wonderful phrase, endorphins and outdoorphins. You know, get outdoors, get some fresh air, and life will get some perspective. But we just have to keep encouraging and hope that as perceptions of body image change and we see more and more children coming through with a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, so they know it's not about being able to achieve something in sport, it's just about doing the sport and having fun with other people who are enjoying it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. You don't have to be the best or the fastest or the most skilled to take part and enjoy it. Although, of course, you might turn out to be one of those things,
yeah.
And like want to progress it. Hope, what about you, sort of looking at young women and girls kind of coming up into the sport?
I think definitely the visibility really helps. I think that's part of the reason why women's football has really exploded, aligned to all the challenges that it still has. But the visibility has certainly encouraged participation at a very, very young age. Young girls are now walking around with female players' names on their shirts, where perhaps in my day it would be a male player's name on their shirts. And there are opportunities more so than ever before for young girls of any ability to get involved in the sport. I think, as you rightly said, the challenge is keeping them there. We know that the dropout age, 12, 13, when they start becoming teenagers, is a challenge. I think in some way it would be great to promote being sweaty is you can still be feminine. And I don't think we do enough around that to say that being sweaty, you know, a little bit muscly is quite attractive as opposed to it being unattractive. I think some work really needs to be done around the imagery of that. And I think something that's really, really working well in girls football, women's football is mixed football. So young girls now can play in mixed leagues with boys, against boys, and I think that really helps alleviate the long-term, the misogyny, the prejudice that girls can't do when young boys have been brought up playing alongside girls. I think that is massive in women's football, and certainly going forward will really help our cause in promoting the game and promoting girls in football. I think as well at the other end, football's done really well to promote you know, perhaps those people that were into the game that didn't have the opportunity to play. You know, there's new initiatives around walking football. So actually I might have exited the game at quite a young age because of opportunity, but now there are opportunities where I can get back into the game at 40 plus, which is fantastic. But I really do believe that the visibility and, you know, being sweaty and a bit muscly is quite, you know, let's deem it as attractive rather than unattractive. I think it would really help. And that goes for any females in sport, I would argue.
Yeah, and so much of that relates to kind of messaging that came out in our report that, you know, girls get about the way it's okay to be as a girl. You know, girls are given t-shirts that say, you know, that they're sort of beautiful or kind or thoughtful, rather than ones that talk about being active and adventurous and taking risks. And we're sending really clear messages about what is and isn't acceptable ways to be a girl, but those are incredibly restrictive. And, you know, you can't play a game of football without getting a bit muddy and getting a bit sweaty. So if we've spent all this time teaching girls that that's, you know, not a kind of the way that they can or should behave, you know, it's going to create additional barriers to participation. I'm going to be opening up to Q&A in a few minutes. So if you do have a question, pop it in the Q&A function. But before I do, I wanted to ask each of the panelists about a moment that you've had engaging with sport that's sort of been really life affirming for you, or helped you kind of more broadly in your life think about who you are and improved your kind of well-being. So, I mean, Saf, can I start with you? I mean, you might want to go with the kind of your most recent adventure.
Yeah, well, there are a few moments that were life affirming on the row. A couple of weeks in, I fell overboard in a storm in the middle of the night, and getting back onto the boat and going, okay, so I'm still alive. That was a really positive moment in an odd way. And then finishing the row was spectacular and will be one of the best moments of my life. But I think for me, it's because my imposter syndrome, which I'm suspecting I'm not the only person today who suffers from it, was quite, well, it was crippling me. It was constraining how I came across at work. It was constraining how I came across my personal life. And unless somehow the Atlantic is declassified as an ocean, no one can take that away from me. I have now done that. And I think that sport can give us that moment of saying, you know, be it I've run a mile, or I've run 10K, or I've run a marathon, whatever it is, no one can take that achievement away from you. And I think that is wonderful to start eating away at the imposter syndrome and say, right, if you can't take this away from me, then maybe you can't take this, maybe you can't take this. So for me, falling overboard and finishing the race. Yeah,
surviving falling overboard, I can see why that would definitely be life affirming. That's amazing, thank you. Stacey, what about you?
I'd probably say when I first started out on my line of research, which was looking at women as football fans. I mean, to be honest, I'd always grown up thinking, you know, am I a little bit weird? Are there many going to male-dominated football stadiums? And whenever I did play football, it was predominantly with boys. So it was like, yes, I was lucky. I was fortunate to have a PE teacher at the time who was quite progressive and did set up a girls' team. And I now know that that's not the case. Certainly for my generation, it wasn't necessarily standard from the interviews that I've done. So with that background, and then when I began my research, being able to speak with women going back to the 1950s through to the present day, for whom football is like the most important thing in their life, and being able to smash some of the stereotypes in some ways and find others, I guess, like me, to think like, actually, do you know what? There's a lot more people present in this than we know about. Because when I first began my project, the reason that I was looking at women and football fandom was because there just was no research on women as football fans. And it's kind of just assumed that the supporters are all male, where women were included, if they were even mentioned, especially historically, they were blamed for declining attendances. There was assumptions that women don't like football. So after the post-war Spectator high, women would pull their male partners away from going to the stadium because they wouldn't be there. And so it's just incredible to go out and speak to women, you know, for 4 hours sometimes, to just hear about the role that the sport has played in their lives, going back as far as the 1950s and then through to the present day, and how they've negotiated the stereotypes and been able to overcome those, and how it's been such a central life interest, I guess, across their lives.
Yeah, you're not alone and you're not weird. Just love sport. That's great. Linda, what about you?
I would say that my running journey started off me wanting to kind of lose weight and get fit at first. That's why I started running. But I realized that after, achieving, doing 5K, 10K, and running with other women, I realized that my body was capable of doing amazing things. And I started to enjoy not only the physical aspect, but the social aspect of running. I could be running with a group of friends and not realize that I've run 6-7 miles because it felt so easy. It felt at ease. I felt at ease. And I always said to myself that I would never, ever run a marathon. But after doing a half marathon, I felt on top of the world. And I thought, after a couple of days, I forgot about it. And I thought, yes, I could do this. So I wrote one of my friends, the founder of Black Girls Do Run, Tasha, into doing a marathon with me. So we trained together for months on end and was so disciplined. I gave up so many things in life, including drinking, sleeping. We trained every week and we managed to train up to, I think it was 22 miles, something I didn't even think my body was possible of doing. And even though our race got cancelled due to COVID, we ran up to 22 miles and 3 weeks later, we were in lockdown. But later on in that year, we ran it virtually. It wasn't the same, but I was just ecstatic that after going through all of that training, I was still managed to complete that race and run a marathon, something I said that I would never do. So it showed me that, you should never give up on your dreams and your goals. And with training and planning, you can achieve a lot of things.
I love that. And it's amazing that you managed to do a virtual marathon. I also think there's something really powerful in that, moving from sport as something to improve yourself, to make ourselves better, to something that allows us to just enjoy ourselves and be in our bodies and feel happy and healthy and strong.
Definitely.
It's
definitely improved my mental health as well. When I'm feeling a bit low, I just put on my trainers and I go outside and I run and I come back and I'm happy. I've got so much energy and my endorphins are so high. So it does, it's an all-round benefit. I think it benefits in all different aspects.
Amazing. Hope, tell us about what sport and football's meant for you. Sorry, Hope, you're on mute.
What football and sports meant for me?
Yeah, in terms of one of those moments of loving it, enjoying it, what it's kind of brought to you.
I think there's so many things that I could talk about. The love of the game. I've had so many positive experiences in my career that have been so uplifting that I've gone, I feel very privileged, very blessed. But I think the standout occasion for me was probably being the coach at the Olympics, which I didn't want to do, because my whole life has been coaching. Every summer I've been away. I've never had a summer at home, and I thought this is the one time I'm going to put my feet up and just enjoy the Olympics. But then I was asked to be the coach of Team GB, which I really didn't want to do. And then friends are telling me, you're stupid, you've got to do it. Okay, and I did it. And I just remember being in the GB, the whole GB environment, where all the athletes go, where everybody's all in the same building and there's all these nations under one roof. And I just thought, wow, this is a really special thing that I'm experiencing here. And this is all because of my love for this game that's allowed me to have this opportunity. And then obviously I don't know if anybody knows this, but in 2012, women's football actually kicked off the Olympics. They start the games a week or two before. So we were in Cardiff, the stadium was packed. We kicked off the Olympics, and I just remember thinking, this is just such a nice feeling. And I've been given this opportunity, and any other opportunity that comes thereafter, I'm just going to really enjoy it. And I've just tried to enjoy it ever since, really.
Brilliant. What a moment in history to be part of.
Yeah. Great.
I'm gonna go to some of our questions. Ruth asks, I think sort of responding to your comment, Stacey, is there any research similar to this with other sports? It'd be really interesting to see if this is across the board or whether it's a particular problem for football. Then another question about how can we influence those media portrayals of women being strong and sporty as a really positive thing. And then another question here that says, as a 20-year-old woman who wants to get back into her passion of football, but now turn it into a career as a coach or backroom staff, I feel like I'm too late to start and unsure where to get the right experience. Is there anything Hope would suggest to me to get started? So perhaps if I could come to each of you and you can kind of respond to the bits of those that feel right for you. Stacey, can I come to you first?
Yeah, so in relation to the question about existing research, so this study was the first piece of work to look at men's responses to women's sport, especially in this new age of increased media visibility. Typically the work, especially in football, is focused on men as hooligans, fans of men fans and fans of the men's game. So there wasn't anything to build on. So when I was looking at this, there was no comparator, if you see what I mean. So there definitely needs to be follow-on work. I'd love to do something to see how things are changing now that the Women's Super League and the increased visibility of that is further along the way, to see whether things have changed. I think, unfortunately, not in terms of other studies at this point in time. I think, yes, there definitely needs to be more work, especially looking at other sports as well, and whether the attitudes are as entrenched as what we find with football as that history of being a traditionally male sport. But that's something that there is a need for more work to be done on, I think.
Thank you. Saf.
Sorry, my mute button was playing up then. So I think in terms of having images and other experiences that young women and girls can see, social media does provide a good platform, but it does require people to invest in it. And my rowing partner, if she was on the call right now, would be rolling her eyes, because she was so pro our social media channels. She did so much for it. And I sort of hid in the background. And you can see in some of the photos, I'm literally hiding behind her because I didn't want people to see me. And looking back now and realizing, actually, if someone had seen a fairly chubby, because I lost 4 stone on the row, a fairly chubby person who was actually going and putting herself out there, then maybe I might have inspired just one other person. So I think there is a huge amount of benefit that can come from social media if we channel it correctly. But on the flip side, there is so much negative, and I can understand, I've got nieces who are just coming up to the age of wanting their own computers and thinking that there's an awful lot of negative body image stuff on there that I don't want them to see. But I do want them to see possible role models in all different walks of life. So it's a really fine balance.
Yeah, that's a real challenge, the flip side of social media, which can be so empowering and kind of create communities for people and ways for us to see alternative ways of being a woman, but also, yeah, it can be incredibly harmful and have some really, really difficult implications as well. Hope, what were your thoughts on those, and maybe in particular on that kind of getting into a career in football question?
Yeah, I think the first thing, if you want to get back in, volunteering is always a good starting point. Any coach that's been on a coaching journey generally starts with volunteering with local school side, boys or girls, which are pretty easy to get into. And then it's about just getting your qualifications. There are first level entry qualifications that give you an insight into coaching and what that might be about. And then you just get the other qualifications thereafter. There are so many, I don't know, schools, after school clubs that need volunteer coaches, and really without volunteers, the game would be dead. I think as a result of volunteers, the game is where it is now. So there are plenty of opportunities. I just think it's a case of finding the right one for you and the right match for you. But that's definitely a starting point.
And Hope, in the question, she says she's 20, but she's worried she's left it too late. What do you think about that?
Not. 20 is definitely not too late. I know people that have started a coaching career way beyond 20, working in schools, working at their children's schools, and then found themselves getting qualified because they loved it so much. So age really isn't a barrier, certainly when you want to start a coaching career, and certainly 20 is no age to start that journey. So good luck. I hope you do it. Go for it.
Thank you. Linda, did you have thoughts on that, and maybe around how we create those more positive images, or encourage the media really to live up to their responsibility, rather than putting on individual women to kind of solve that problem?
Yeah, definitely. I agree that definitely social media and can definitely help on the way that women are portrayed in sport. I definitely think as well, working with brands can also help. Definitely. I think that can also change the face of sport, and in particular running, focusing on people that are not usually represented, to show people that they do run or they do take part in sports and physical activity. So I think definitely working with brands like we have in the past will show, like, your everyday person, which we are, that it's possible to be part of that and enjoy it as well. So yeah, definitely social media, more exposure, and working with brands can definitely help, is the way forward, I think. And it shows that it's more accessible to all.
We've had a couple of other questions that kind of relate to this, the challenges around self-consciousness and judgment. And so one woman's asked, my 13-year-old daughter stopped playing netball in the school team because she feels so self-conscious of her growing body in the short, tight dresses she has to wear. She says schools really need to look at the equality of access and opportunity that girls are experiencing and removing those barriers. And another question around what parents can do to challenge those gender stereotypes their daughters face around sport. I mean, we've seen issues around kit coming up before, and recently it was a volleyball team challenging the requirements for their kit, which were minimal. How much do you think these are the kind of things that we can address and change, so that more girls feel comfortable and confident participating? And what would each of your advice be to parents who want to support their daughters to get involved? This time I'll start with Saf.
So I went to a school where I wore school uniform and a school skirt for the entire time, which was a problem because I loved climbing trees, and the nuns pointed out to me that it just wasn't okay for me to climb trees in a skirt. And to a degree, it's wear some shorts and try and understand that it's absolutely fine and it's confident and enjoy the movement rather than thinking about what anyone else cares, which is so easy to say and so impossible to do. But I was teaching some students at a school how to use a rowing machine, an erg, and it was going really well when I was doing it with boys. And then the girls started, they were all in their skirts, and the first thing that happened was the seat of the rowing machine just caught the skirt and they all fell off. Well, each of them fell off at a time. And so you started having to tell these sort of 8, 9, 10-year-olds that they had to really tuck the skirt up underneath and then bring it between the legs and then start rowing, which was an easy workaround. But it was such a pity that, a pair of sports shorts and the problem was solved for the younger girls. And as your body changes, just having that approach of, yes, your body is changing. And if someone says something, that is on them, not on you. But yeah, and it's the volleyball example is horrific. And I think that schools need to have a fairly, what's wrong with a pair of tracksuit bottoms and a t-shirt? Just have it simple for everybody. There's no difference, and then you get rid of so many of the issues.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly brings back some very raw memories of school PE kit for me. Hope, what would be your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Saf, really. And I think if I'm not a parent, but if I was, I would definitely be petitioning, because I used to wear those tight knickers, which, you know, I'm sure I stopped wearing them. I just put shorts on. But if it's a school rule, it's quite hard for a girl to suddenly go, well, I'm going against that, I'm going to put a pair of shorts on. I think it's for parents to petition the school. I think that's a really good starting point, and perhaps celebrate, you know, maybe we should celebrate more with our kids about our changing bodies and embrace it a bit more. But definitely petition the school, you know, do everything you can to get that uniform changed, and really just wear a pair of shorts. I mean, I don't know how difficult that is to change that rule in a school. So that would be my thoughts initially.
Thank you. Stacey.
Yeah, I think it's really frustrating because we're not talking about it's not rocket science, is it? Like we've got, I mean, got an extensive evidence base in terms of the women fans that I've interviewed going back generations and going from, like say, 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, looking at their experiences of physical education across all of that time period. And it is so depressing when you see the same themes coming up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s to girls talking today about their experiences, one of which is PE kits, and people have really raw and vivid memories of physical education. You know, this is a cohort of women who are passionately committed to football, but they have got that interest despite rather than because of physical education. If anything, that was sort of channeling them away from the sport. So it seems pretty obvious to me that we need to think of ways around that, and whether it be a solution with the PE kit as a starting point. I mean, that's not going to resolve everything, but it would certainly get rid of some of the trauma that is coming up time and time again. The culture of femininity and what happens when girls hit teenage years, I mean, that is something that I think is more complex. But another quick fix to me, which absolutely baffles me, is the discussion around sexist teachers, and the discussion that some girls are giving, even in very recent years, that you have boys sports, you have girls sports, and you know, the girls at my school don't get to play the football and rugby, we play the netball. And you're kind of thinking, I don't understand how we have a national curriculum that was meant to be designed to, you know, make sure that we have equal access to different subjects. I can't understand why there's not more uproar about this, because I would have thought that if girls came home from school and were talking about, oh yes, today we had to do cookery because we were told that our role in life is to be a good wife and mother, or something along those lines, I suspect there'd be a bit of an outcry, whereas the boys went and did the woodwork. So I don't understand how this is, because it's, well, I do understand it's because it's sport, and so you can still have that, well, this is the traditionally male and this is the traditionally female, and we have that split off. And so it's to me, it's really frustrating then to hear about how people are going to go around in a really roundabout way to get access to some of these sports. That's certainly not to say that all girls would want to play a sport like football, but if they never get the opportunity, then how are you ever going to know? So I think on the back of the recent momentum that's been building, especially around the international events, some of this is changing, but there's still evidence to show that actually just basic access is an issue. And again, that is being able to just say, look, if whatever sport you're providing to boys, you provide to girls, and vice versa, to me seems like quite a quick fix that the government really should be backing.
Can I ask a question?
Thank you so much.
Can I ask a question?
Hope, I'm sorry, we're actually in danger of overrunning into our next event. I'm so sorry, but we can carry on the conversation offline. Linda, can I come to you for a final word in 30 seconds, if you can?
Yeah, just a quick one. I think things have come a long way since when I was at school. Compared to the boys, our PE kit was completely different. We had PE shorts and a really, really tight top, and it made uncomfortable times when it came to things like trampolining. I didn't want to bounce because I didn't want my boobs to go up and down or my skirt to fly up. Even though we had shorts underneath, it was still uncomfortable. But compared to my daughter's school, now it's standard between the boys and the girls. They wear tracksuit bottoms and shorts, and the top is standard. It's the same for boys and girls. So I find that she's more confident when it comes to sport. She just never comes home. She doesn't complain about anyone looking at her or what her PE kit looks like, because it's standard. So I think that's something that can definitely work, because it's something that works across the board. If the PE kit is standard across all levels for boys and girls, it can work.
Thank you so much. Thank you to my amazing panel. You've been brilliant and really inspirational. I've really enjoyed that. And thank you to your audience for participating and for your questions as well. Please do donate to support Fawcett's Equal Play campaign to support all children to play and just to be themselves without limits. Information about that is in the chat. I'm now going to hand over to Katherine at Women's Equality Network Wales. Are you there, Katherine?
I am indeed.
Thank you so much. Happy International Women's Day, and over to you.